Tonight, we are honored to have a special guest. Thank you everyone for coming. But before we start, let me introduce Rabbi Maimon Pinto, who will say a few words about Hanukkah. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace. I'm very excited to be here tonight with you. Looking forward to hear Michelle and her presentation. I really have to say something that I really miss you guys. The Sisterhood, it's so nice to see a lot of you. I haven't seen many for many months. Fortunately, with all the situation, I see people from even out of town here that are joining us. It's very exciting to be here with you. There is a very famous proverb from a sage that said something about the Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah candles are very discreet. They burn very slow and light. They light up the room when we light them. But if we listen attentively, and as we light the menorah and the Chanukiah, the lights themselves have a very deep message and deep meaning behind them. And we know that the whole story of Hanukkah was at a time, a very dark time for the Jewish nation, persecution, and everything that goes around. I'm sure most of you know the story of Hanukkah. And so what do we to learn from this whole message? So the first message, it's very simple. First of all, it's a little bit of light pushes a lot of darkness. And when even a time of persecutions or whatever, even our own personal lives, when we go through trepidations or difficulties, just a little bit of light. And when we look at the light, when I mean light is just looking at the positive and always focusing on the good things that we have around us, our family, our friends, our community, the sisterhood, the people that are here to support us. And when we look at those positive things, a lot of the darkness, if you will, kind of is pushed to the side. I was debating tonight whether I should share with you this story. I was going back and forth in my head. I just heard this story tonight, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to share or it was the right thing to share with you tonight, but I've decided to share with you anyways. Tonight there was the shloshim of Mr. Yosef Shemesh. I don't know if some of you remember him. He was a member of our community, a member of the Iraqi community, and I was there with his children, Ronnie and David. And Ronnie told me a fascinating story about his father. His father passed away. He was in his 90s. And I remember, meeting him a few times. And it was very close to Ronnie's son's bar mitzvah, which is going to be coming up this January. And I was in touch with Ronnie back and forth. Ronnie lives now in Great Neck in New York. And he really wanted his father to take part of his son's bar mitzvah. And anything in any kind of way. And he was waiting, and his father was not really doing well. And unfortunately, he got the call that it's not going well, and he had to get back to Montreal. And he had a whole story how he got on the plane and so forth. But he really wanted to share something with his father. His father was he was dying. And he said, how can I do something to, my father should take part of something of the bar mitzvah. I know that it's in a few months from now, but I want to do something. And he got to the hospital, and he was looking at the monitor, and the heartbeat was just, not looking good. And he called his wife, and he asked his son, Yosef, that carried his father's name. And he told him, Yosef, can you please, sing a little bit of your parasha that you learned for your bar mitzvah. Now I'm here in Saba's room. Can you sing something? And Yosef was a little bit shy, and he was on the spot, so he didn't do it. But he went to his room, and he recorded a very short 2 or 3 minutes of the singing of the parasha that he learned for his bar mitzvah. And he sent it to his father on his phone. And Ronnie tells me that he's looking at the monitor, and unfortunately the heartbeat was almost flat at that moment. And he got the recording from his wife, and he played it to his father right next to his ear, as his father is breathing his last breath. And as soon as he played for the 2-3 minutes, the heartbeat just started going up and down for those 3 minutes. And at the end of the recording, his father just passed away. So Ronnie obviously found that fascinating, and I don't know why exactly I'm sharing this story with you, but I found that it's so inspiring and so hopeful that even at the time that we find ourselves breathing our last moments, we always feel a connection to our heritage, to the Torah, and always have this hope. And this hope comes from our community, comes from the people that are around us. And I think that's the message of Hanukkah, the deep message of Hanukkah, as we gather around the Chanukiah or the menorah, whatever you want to call it, and you light the candles around with your children, and you feel the warmth of Hanukkah and the hope that our community and our religion give to all of us. So with this, I want to send you my blessings and my happy Hanukkah to you and your family, for good health to all of us. Brochim to you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much. And now I have the pleasure to introduce to all of you Michele Shemie Cale. She's a director of engineering at MK Plastics Corporation, and she's going to talk to us about from microgravity to macro management decisions, a woman's journey in engineering. Michele Shemie is a Master of Engineering, is the Director of Engineering at a ventilation systems manufacturing company. Michele graduated as a mechanical engineer from McGill in 1992, then finished her Master's of Mechanical Engineer at McGill in 95. During her graduate studies, she was involved in dust fuel combustion research in a microgravity environment and performed experiments on NASA's KC-135 aircraft. Michele then worked for 15 years at Pratt & Whitney, Canada, as a mechanical designer, then project engineer, helping to create and flight test gas turbine engines for commercial and corporate aircraft. After taking a break to have 4 kids, Michele now leads a small engineering team with big goals. Michele now has to make management decisions involving changing the work processes and culture of small company into a mindset of a large one. Michele is now finding that human resources, resistance to change, and interdepartmental communication sometimes proves to be just as challenging as the technical design. The daily juggling of work and family in a Shomer Shabbat setting is Michele's greatest challenge and greatest joy. So without further ado, go ahead, Michele.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Grace. Good evening, everyone. As you know, my name is Michele Shemie Cale, and I'm really, truly honored to be with you all tonight. I want to thank the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue Sisterhood for having me speak tonight. And a special thank you to Grace Paris Lally. She is an excellent support, and I truly am grateful for your support and your helping me prepare for this, Grace. Thank you. I want to thank also Françoise for our tech Zoom tonight. And thank you very much, Rabbi Pinto, for your inspiration and reminding us that Hanukkah is around the corner. Okay, I also want to send a particular thank you to my mom, because I want to thank her for being so proud of me that she suggested me as a speaker tonight. So thank you to my mom. Hello, everyone from near and far. I love Zoom for this reason, that we can all get together. My talk tonight has a subtitle, A Woman's Journey in Engineering. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So, all right. So as I said, the subtitle of this talk is A Woman's Journey in Engineering. Initially, I thought I would call it A Woman's Career in Engineering, because it's actually been 33 years since I started my career in engineering, since I started studying at McGill. And so I thought there's a lot to say about that. But Grace suggested that we change the word to journey, because And I liked that change because my career is really one part of this larger journey that I'm in right now, which I would like to share with you some of the highlights of it. Okay, what is engineering? And I'll start with what it is, and then I'll talk to you about my particular journey in engineering. I first want to say that engineering really is so fun. I love engineering. And what it is that it really is using science, the sciences, the pure sciences, to help us solve everyday problems. So when we're talking about pure and applied sciences, your pure sciences, chemistry, physics, and math, when you apply them to solve problems and improve the lives of people on this planet, then, or off the planet, you are essentially doing engineering. Engineering is also very much a teamwork. It's a team sport. It's rarely done alone, and I love collaborating with other people, and that's why I love engineering. Also, one of my early memories is that when I was really little, about 6 or 7, I remember my mother took me and my siblings to go pick up my father from his office. So my father was an engineer, and I have 3 uncles who were engineers as well. So I had encouragement from and awareness from very early. We went to my father's office, and I remember the sea of drafting tables, and my father furiously talking with his colleagues and exchanging, and my mom in the background saying, "Hurry up, it's time to go home." What I could feel was that my dad was having fun. He was having just as much fun as when my mommy said to me that it was time to come home from a friend's house. Engineering, I knew my dad was loving it, and that was a preview for me. So what kinds of engineering are there? I'm a mechanical engineer, so I like to talk first about mechanical engineering. Mechanical engineering is really dealing with things that move. So airplanes and spacecraft and robots and cars, the robots that are used to manufacture the cars, these are all things that mechanical engineers deal with. Civil engineers or structural engineers deal with things that generally don't move, or things that we don't want to move, like a bridge. They certainly shake and there's certainly vibration, but we generally don't want our big structures like the Jacques Cartier Bridge to move. There's electrical engineering, like my father, and electricity, how it moves, how it powers things. Where do we get electricity from? How is it generated? Here in Quebec, we have hydroelectrical power plants. There are also coal power plants. There are also nuclear power plants. How do we generate electricity? And then how do we get it from the power plant to our fridge in our kitchen? This is an electrical engineering issue. Okay, then there's chemical engineering. Chemical engineering, where do we get all these chemicals to have different color fireworks? Where do we get the chemicals? How do we store them? How do we mix them together to make useful things that improve our lives, like medicines or artificial flavoring for our cereal? This is a chemical engineering issue. So again, all of this is so much fun. It's all about science and math and applying it to real life, and it's about teamwork. The engineering technical team, when you're working as an engineer, you need to solve all of your technical problems all at the same time. For example, the materials that you use for your design, are they strong enough to hold the structure that it needs to hold? Are they light enough to fly? Are they heavy enough to hold the structure? What environment is your material going to be in? Is it going to be in a wet environment, in a dry environment, a very hot or corrosive chemical environment? You need to choose materials. Your design also has to fit together. Your piece has to fit with what in the space that's delegated to it. It has to be able to attach to the next thing. It has to be manufacturable. You can't, if you make a wonderful design, but it can't be manufactured, if the machines you have at your disposal have to drill a hole, but where you've designed the hole is in a place your machine can't access, then you have to go back to the drawing table. So all of these technical issues are what the technical team has to work with together. And That's your technical engineering team. But then there's the non-technical, and that's usually the money people. So the material you want to use, is it too expensive for your budget? Or can you only acquire it because the global sourcing issue now that it can't come from China before 6 months from now? So if you've committed to your customer for having your product in 4 months, but you can only achieve your materials in 6 months, well, back to the drawing board. So you have your technical team and your non-technical team, and you usually need a project manager to make sure everything is communicated clearly. Every person in the team knows what to do and knows when you're going to be done so that they can start what they need to do. Teamwork, lots of communication. So that's what engineering is, and I certainly would love to take questions if there are any. But now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal journey in my 33 years of being an engineer so far, counting school, starting with day one. My friend and I, 2 18-year-old girls, are walking into the McGill Engineering building for the first time. 2 boys run out of the building and say, "Girls, will you be on our boat racing team?" And we said, "Sure." And they ran and they said, "Great." They ran back into the building, and my friend and I were left saying, "What's boat racing? I don't see any boats. Do you see a river?" What we didn't know was that as of that year, in all of the orientation week competitions that engineers have between each other, there needed to be at least 1 girl on every team. That was the new rule. So slowly we found out that boat racing meant drinking beer, a lot of beer, and in a short amount of time. I drank more beer in that following hour than I had drank in the whole rest of my life prior to that. So that was day one. But what did that mean? That meant that every team needs a girl. It's a requirement. And there were hardly any girls. So we were very visible. The women engineering students were very visible from day one. Okay. Year 2. What is going on? By the grace of God, I was at McGill and not at École Polytechnique. I had just finished my team presentation of my Design 1 engineering project. And that evening we were celebrating and having a great time in the common room, and just all of us being so excited that we just finished this major accomplishment. Then we started hearing what was going on at École Polytechnique that night. It turns, and they are the French equivalent of McGill Engineering. 14 women, almost all exactly my age, ended up dead because a madman came in, and he himself was not accepted to study engineering at École Polytechnique, and he resented every woman who did. So we now know that as the 1989 massacre at École Polytechnique, and not one December 6th goes by that doesn't make me cry and make me realize how lucky I am. Just the words December 6th, thankfully, were saved by my nephew, who was born on December 6th in 2006. Okay, year 3, action. What do you do when you're such a minority? We said, well, okay, we'll encourage more girls to study engineering. It hardly seemed necessary because in 1990, that was the year that McGill saw the most women applications for engineering that they had ever seen by far. But what did that mean? That meant that the reason women didn't apply into engineering traditionally was really because they didn't know it existed. They didn't know, they hadn't heard about it, but now we were in the news all the time. If we thought we were visible before, nothing compared to now. We were very, very visible. Okay, so friends of mine got together and we started a group, and we called ourselves POW, Promoting Opportunities for Women in Engineering. And trust me, we tried to find a word that began with R to stick at the end of this name, but we couldn't find one, so we just stuck with POW. And we did We attended lectures, we researched, and we were very well supported by the McGill engineering faculty. My favorite activity that we organized at the time was visiting high schools. We visited high schools and we always paired up one boy and one girl to go make a presentation to a grade 10 or 11 class, just so they would see, totally normal. You could be a girl, you could be a boy, anyone could study engineering. We told them about engineering and the enthusiasm was just amazing. We were so encouraged by this program. So at that time with POW, we learned really a lot. What we learned was discouraging girls to go into engineering was really not the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the lack of encouragement. So this high school visiting program was really the crown jewel of what we were doing at the time. But now you should all follow POW on Instagram. They are amazing. Now, instead of a little committee under the Engineering Undergraduate Society, they are now over 20 executives and volunteers. They organize mentoring programs, seminars, work site visits. They are incredible. It's amazing what 30 years has done to this committee. Okay, so after that, after my 4 years of undergraduate, I decided to stay in school a little bit longer, like pressing the snooze button when you don't want to wake up. I decided to stay in school and pursue a master's of mechanical engineering. And I was lucky enough to be part of a group that was supported by the Canadian Space Agency. And we conducted experiments in microgravity. This photo that you've all seen by now is perhaps the coolest photo of me taken of all time, until maybe it's rivaled by only one photo taken 13 years later. But let's stick with microgravity for the moment. At that time, NASA conducted a lot of experiments in an aircraft called the KC-135. It was also known as the Vomit Comet. And this is where NASA trained their astronauts. This is where there was a lot of experimentation done. And what it did was this plane flew in parabolas. What you see here, this up and down trajectory. So what it did is it flew up to an altitude that was a normal altitude for flying, like for flying from Montreal to Florida, for example, went up to that altitude, turned on the engines full power and went almost straight up, and then at the top, cut the engines, free floated over the peak and free falled for a while till the engines were put back on full power and back did it and started again. This is what we experienced in that plane is similar to what you've experienced if you've ever been in an elevator moving up very fast. And when you get to your floor, the elevator suddenly slows down and you feel a tiny bit lighter for a fraction of a second. So that's the same idea. Or if you're going down very fast in an elevator and you're getting to your floor and the elevator slows down and you feel heavy and you're pushed into the ground for a fraction of a second. That's what this plane did. And we went from experiencing zero gravity to experiencing twice the force of gravity at the bottom. When you're in 2G like that, twice gravity is 2G, your head is so heavy, it's hard to move. You're so heavy that it's hard to stand up. But it's the transition between the 2G and the 0G that made your stomach turn a little bit. So after you've done that 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 times in a row, most people, about 90% of people, vomit. So that's why it's called the Vomit Comet. But you get used to it. I have a friend who I made during this time attending this lecture. I'm extremely honored to have Laura be listening to this, another one of my colleagues at that time. So yes, it's called the Vomit Comet, and I helped substantiate that name. But here I am playing in microgravity a little bit when we were taking a break from our experiment. Here you also see Julie Payette. She was just selected as a Canadian astronaut at that time from the Canadian Space Agency. She was really nice when she was helping me vomit. Okay. Okay. Right after that, year 8, shortly after I graduated, I did finally enter the working world, and I started working at Pratt & Whitney Canada. I was hired as a junior design engineer, and there was so much paperwork to sign on that first day. There was my salary contract, there was the proprietary information contract, and then there was this other form that I was made to fill out, and I didn't quite understand. I said, "Excuse me, human resources, what is this form?" "It's the visible minority form." And I looked very confused for a good long second, and I asked, "Can you tell by looking at me that I'm Jewish?" So I soon understood that no, they couldn't tell I was Jewish. I was a visible minority because I was a woman. Visible, again, I was not going to be immune to the extra attention that I had experienced over the last 7 years, not going to be immune to that in the working world. So what I did at Pratt & Whitney was I first was in flight testing. We owned this big, huge Boeing aircraft where we tested our our propeller engines and our fan engines. And I worked with designing this aircraft and all the systems in the aircraft to make sure that our corporate engines could fit on the engine. So there's another engine on the side. This plane, I'd never actually flew in this plane, even though it was very similar to the KC-135, but it did not fly in parabolas. So at that time, in my initial years of being an engineer, I did have to sometimes divert the conversation from what I was wearing that day or whether my hair looked how my hair looked that day. I had to bring the conversation back to design. That happened a little bit, but otherwise being visible was not such a big issue, thankfully. It was becoming less and less important. Working with flight testing our engine on our own aircraft, I started working with customer aircraft and the installations of the Pratt & Whitney engines on our customer aircraft. So I was lucky enough to visit Cessna aircraft in the United States, Embraer in Brazil, Dassault Aviation in France, and Israel Aircraft Industries in Israel. So this was a very exciting time in my career. I loved it. And what happened was I became a bit less visible. I was becoming a bit more confident in what I was able to do. So even though business trips, you do a lot of evening dinner business meetings, and all the boys would say, "Let's have a beer." And they'd turn to me and say, "Michelle, would you like a juice?" It was fine with me. I was done with beer after McGill Engineering. So it worked well for me there. Then, at this high point in my career, which was so exciting, I started to experience what every woman experiences when you want to start a family. Work-family balance. I was on maternity leave, and then I worked for 6 months, and then maternity leave, and then I worked for 9 months, and then maternity leave, and then I worked for 2 weeks, and then I went on maternity leave, and I stayed home for an extra 2 years. So these 4 beautiful little girls was what happened during that time, with Brian and me being an amazing team. During this blur of sleepless nights, of diapers, of just really, I'm not sure I remember most of that time. I was in a daze. So at that time, what women experience is that you don't work anymore until the work is done, until your job is finished. You work until daycare is finished. So you got to get your butt to daycare before it's done. And that's now the guiding motivation in your life. And that makes working and a lot harder. It does. Okay. So working mothers all struggle with a balance between the care of their children in their home and their engagement into their work. It's a struggle that there's no clear path for everyone. Everyone has to find their path through this. My husband and I, we found the path. We decided that it was very simple, that if you have two parents working, you have two spouses working, simple. You just need a third spouse. Simple as that. So this was quite a challenging time. And, but in all seriousness, no one does it alone. This is not something that any family can do alone. You either have other family members to help you, you might hire a nanny. These are all options at your disposal that you have to work with when you are a working mom. Also, in our situation, we are Shomer Shabbat. We observe the Sabbath, which means we don't work, we don't do groceries, we don't plan birthday parties, we don't cook. All those things we don't do on Saturday. So that means a 50% reduction in that kind of time in the weekend, which is quite a challenge, but it's also a forced rest for 24 hours, 25 hours. I am so grateful for that. It's something to look forward to all the time for many reasons. So after this period, this 7-year period of having kids and going back to work on and off, I finally went back to work, but part-time. I no longer could work at Pratt & Whitney Canada. They said they'd love to have me back, but they needed a full-time engineer. So I found a place, very lucky for me, that agreed to hire me part-time. I only worked 3 days a week for about 3 years. And that was, I believe, very generous and very patient of them, of MK Plastics Corporation, and also very forward thinking. So they stuck it out, and now after a few years, I went from doing small things or smaller things at the company, and now I'm leading the engineering department. So it turned out to be great. But one of the things about working part-time, which helped me and my family, was it helped my family and myself adjust to having mom outside of the house. Initially, like I think a lot of women do, I thought, despite the fact that I'm working out of the house, that time is going to come from my time, my personal time. It will not affect my family at all. I still was doing all the organizing, the cooking, and the groceries, things like that. And I became busier and busier at work and more tired. So slowly, our family had to adjust, and the kids and everybody had to get more involved in the family, in the work at home. So that was something I had to learn. And our COVID pandemic actually helped in that way, because the kids had to really step up and do laundry and clean bathrooms and help with lunches. And so that accelerated what should naturally happen when a mom starts working, that all these tasks have to start being shared, because it is something I had to learn, because I grew up in the model of the mom did everything, right, mommy? So even though I was working just as many hours as my husband outside of the house, I still had this perception that I had to do everything at home. So that had to change. So I went from being a part-time worker to leading the engineering department. And here you see a view of Old Montreal looking at downtown. Here you see the Shum Hospital. And I'm going to point out, I'm not sure if I could show you with my mouse, but these machines on top of the building, this is now what I work with. This is a zoom in of what you were just looking at on the roof of the Shum Hospital. These are a whole bunch of fans that are the ventilation system that are pushing air outside of the building far enough that it doesn't get re-ingested into the windows of the building. So there's all kinds of different engineering technical solutions to make this machinery work. There's parts that are made by our company, manufactured outside of the company, assembled at our company, transported. All this stuff is what I help coordinate. But I had no idea that being the director of an engineering department also meant a ton of human resources and a ton of coordination that I really did not anticipate. Back to teamwork. So the teamwork, which I love, the reason I love engineering is that all the teamwork, the technical and non-technical teamwork. Now I was mandated to come into this company, this relatively small company compared to the one I worked with before, and try to make this company act more like a big company with rigid processes, reducing inefficiencies, and changing the way the engineering department actually designed their parts and filed their parts. So this is a huge, huge shift in how the company was working. And my mandate is to change that, and I'm still working on that now. I want to continue this thread of being visible, being a woman in engineering is now becoming less and less important. I'm more senior, I'm more confident in my technical ability, and it's an issue that has all but gone away. So it's when you come into, and you're a relatively new person in a company, and you come in and say, hey, we're going to change our processes. We're going to, all that you've been doing for 15 or 20 years, we're going to change how you do it. That often sparks resistance. And this is what I mean by human resources. And has not been the easiest thing to convince people to change how they do things. And that resistance that I felt, girls, it could really be mistaken for, oh, they're treating me not so well or not so respectfully because I'm a woman. But that really, I don't think was the case. Now I'm at a point in my career where I am senior and people feel threatened, and it is no longer an issue that I'm a woman. It's an issue that I'm senior and I'm a relatively new person in the company. So not to be confused when what is the issue at stake, which I found very important, something that I felt was a big learning curve for me. My big sister helped me clarify that. Thank you, Lisa. So I'd like to, another reason possibly why being a woman in engineering is no longer a central focus to my daily life is perhaps because of all this, my seniority. It's been a long time, but the engineers that I've recently hired and who I'm working with, they were all born after I graduated from engineering. So they have a whole different mindset, and it's really, times have changed. So I guess I'd like to end this by saying that it's a challenge, this balancing my life and my work with my motherhood, being a wife and a friend and a volunteer and a member of my community. It is definitely difficult, but it's very well worth it. It's a journey, and this is all part of my journey. And keeping all these different roles that I have in my life that I'm so fortunate to have, I'm keeping these roles is important for my own fulfillment, and each one enhances the others. And on the other hand, it's very important to role model to my 4 daughters that this is what life has to offer. You can have all these roles, not all at the same time, all the time. You can do it sequentially, but these are all available to you in your future. So what I would like to say is that I'm already very, very proud of my daughters. And I'm hoping that I can express my pride in them the same way that my happy and successful mother has expressed her pride in me tonight and throughout my life. So thank you to everybody, and feel free to ask any questions. That's it.
Anyone, thank you so much, Michele. Before I properly thank you, I'm going to allow people to ask questions, either raise your hand or
should I stop sharing my screen now,
sure,
Grace?
Sure, so we can see everyone
Okay.
at the same time.
Okay.
Ken Shemie has a question. He wants to know, how is the house renovation going?
And that is, I was, sorry, who asked that question?
Ken Shemie.
Okay, hi. Well, that is one of the top 10 stresses in people's lives, is doing home renovations. And so it's one of the roles that I have to manage. And again, everything one at a time. And basically, it's going okay. We're halfway done.
Karen A, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Karen?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I want to thank Michele for a great presentation. It was really interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing all that. I find it interesting that you're in the field of ventilation. We hear all about how important it is for COVID, and also, well, I guess it's, you know, it's important for the environment too, in terms of retaining heat, and can you tell us more about what the challenges have been recently with the pandemic, and whether business is booming, or has nobody changed their way of doing things?
Well, our business is definitely affected by the customer demand is affected by new construction of hospitals, of universities, which has not slowed so much. But we are a manufacturing company, and almost every manufacturing company now is challenged by the supply chain. We buy metals, we cut the metals in our shop, or we sometimes buy parts that are made completely by a supplier. And so the transportation, whereas, you know, and we do order a lot of things from China. So in the pandemic, really the past year and a half, we've quintupled the price it costs us to transport things from China, and it's not coming fast. So there is definitely, in all manufacturing businesses, there's a huge effect of the pandemic.
But can we expect better ventilation?
Well, ventilation, this is something that is, the technology that we're developing in our factory is not new technology from now, but we are continually trying to do research and development to improve the efficiencies of fans. And in fact, not only during this pandemic time, but over the past 5 years, there has been the regulatory bodies in the international ventilation regulatory bodies for building codes are making, and especially with the Biden win in the United States has pushed this further, that regulation is they're regulating efficiencies much more. So it's the mandate is on the manufacturing companies to produce fans that are more efficient and use less energy. So to do what they need to do. There are very strict codes of air quality in residential, in commercial, in all kinds, in aircraft. All the codes are there, are international standards for regulating the air that you breathe, and the heat and the humidity that you're exposed to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Michele. Before I go on to the next question, if you are shy and just want to type your question in the chat, I will gladly read it. Albert Herskovich, go ahead. We're going to ask you to unmute you.
All right, I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you very much, Grace, and thank you very much, Michele, for this amazing presentation. Kol hakavod to you. It's great that you're able to juggle all these balls in the air as an engineer and a mother. Kol hakavod. One question I have for you, as an engineer myself, why is it that so many engineers end up in management or in non-engineering fields? Marketing, banking, insurance companies, CEOs of large companies.
Well,
do you have an explanation for that?
Okay, I have two very real observations of that. First of all, is that I guess the very simple one is money. Management positions generally pay more than strictly technical engineering positions, and when management requires critical thinking, which is, you know, as I mentioned, the action items and making sure everything is done in a sequence that everybody can do their actions. And that is, engineers are good at that. The engineers are good at being project managers in general. And if they like that, generally manufacturing companies like the ones I've worked in reward management financially more than they reward the technical. So it's both an interest issue and a salary issue. I think that's quite those are the two striking reasons I find. But I think that engineering lends itself well to managing. Not, it depends on your personality, but managing people or managing action items are both things that engineers are well prepared to do. So that's my take on it for so far. But,
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Albert. And next question we have in the chat, Marlo Anzarut asks, as a student in CEGEP thinking about going into engineering, do you have any key advice that I should keep in mind?
Oh, yes. You're in CEGEP already? Are you in pure and applied, or are you in health sciences? Regardless of which one you're in, both of them, you could go into engineering, no problem. I have two things to say. First of all, whichever of the sciences that you happen to like, if you like the mechanics, you can go into mechanical engineering. If you like electricity and magnetism, you could go into electrical engineering or computer engineering, which I didn't mention before. But also, you should not necessarily be in a rush. If you want to do a technical, some kind of hands-on experience before you study engineering, that I would have loved to have done that. It's great to have hands-on experience. If you took a mechanics course or if you took a computer programming courses, these are all really good to when you get into engineering in university, you're learning a lot of theory about things you've seen already. So, and then don't be worried if you choose an engineering and you find you want to switch to another one, that's okay too. There's no loss. The more you do is the more you'll be exposed to in your education. And it's so much fun.
We have a question in the chat from Shelly Benaim. She wants to know, when do you find time to do volunteer work and what do you do?
That has gone in cycles in my life. When I had 2 kids, I was more able to join the committees on both in my children's school and in my synagogue. And then there were times where I was in a mess of a newborn and in a mess of things like that, where I was definitely less able to volunteer. So I've done a lot of volunteering, but I don't do all of these things at the same time. So right now, at the moment, I recently became more responsible in my work, and I am doing a home renovation, and our kids are growing, thank God, and needing our attention more and more. So I'm doing less volunteering now. So what I could say is, juggling all these balls, you don't have them all up in the air at the same time. So one has to accept you just can't do everything full blast all the time. So I do it when I can.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't any questions, I want to thank Michele Shemie Cale and her mom, Vicky Shemie, for giving us the idea of contacting Michelle. Oh, sorry, Shayla has a question. We're not done. Go ahead, Shayla.
Unmute. Okay, it's not a question actually, but I followed your presentation, Michelle, with a lot of interest, but also with a lot of memories. I'm much older than you are. I'm a grandma already, but I did my studies in Paris, finished in early 70s, came to Canada, worked for 6 years in an environment where I was minor visibility, or
a visible minority.
Visible minority. I was a woman. I worked, I did my studies in urbanism and data processing, but I worked in data processing at Molson's company, not Molson Brewery, but it was in Molson Brewery premises. So you can imagine, I was the only woman in the group.
You had no bathroom to yourself.
I was a project leader of a group of men, all of them, and would meet in a tavern. They called it a tavern on the premises of the brewery, and beer was free. You could bring drink as much as you want. I was pregnant, I would go to the cafeteria and pay for my milk, but beer was free. But that's not what I wanted to say. I was really, really a visible minority as a woman. There was no other women around me except 2 secretaries. But that being said, I worked there for 6 years with 2 maternity leave. And then when the third, I have 3 girls as well. When the third girl was born, it was very difficult for me to leave the kids and travel, because in data processing, you work for other users. So you have to travel and travel. And I couldn't make it. You're lucky to have part-time jobs. There was no part-time jobs because you need the mainframe computers. It's not a PC, you know?
Right.
So the challenge really was not the studies like you went through, because in Paris, you don't feel the difference. But it was here being integrated. Not many women worked. Like there were no many women in the workforce, maybe 30% of women at that time. I'm talking 72 that worked. So really, we were minority, visible minority as women.
Wow.
I wanted absolutely to be at home with my kids. Do you understand? I understand very much what you went through. It's frustrating.
I have to say that I'm standing on the shoulders of women like you, Shella,
Yes.
who paved this way, because now, I'm sure that everything that I have experienced, you were experiencing at a much more difficult level, and you didn't have the daycares and the maternity.
Not at all. No daycare, no security. So you have to find, anyway, I don't want to take off your time, but I really, really felt when you were describing all this, it reminded me of years.
Wow.
This is why I ended up in another profession, but that's another story.
Okay. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you. Thank you for that story.
I thank you very much too.
Thank you. So on that note, thank you, Vicky, your mom, for bringing us the idea of contacting you and coming up with this beautiful presentation. Thank you so much, Michele Shemie Cale, for an amazing evening. I have to thank Françoise Baboulot and Viola Tulchinsky and Linda Abudi for their unwavering support of the Spanish. Without them, these functions cannot happen. I want to thank all of you for coming. Before we unmute everyone to thank Michele altogether, I wanted to mention that we just confirmed Dr. Joanna Singerman on podcast Don't Fret Over Your Pet on Tuesday, January 18th. She's a veterinarian. She's the granddaughter of Doris Umbar, and I hope you'll all join us. So please, for Michele, I'm going to ask everyone to unmute yourselves. Françoise. Go ahead, everyone.
Thank you so much, Grace.
And everybody, unmute yourselves and applaud. Thank you so much, Michele.
Wow.
Thank you.
Bravo, Michele.
Good job, Miss.
Shemie, excellent.
Michelle is great, Michelle.
Thank you. Hi, Lisa. Bye, Lisa.
Michelle.
Hi, Lisa. This is totally wonderful.
So what else do you remember?
Well done, Michele.
Well done, Michelle.
Excellent, Michele. It was great.
Michelle, it was a wonderful. Michelle, it was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you all for coming. Lily. It was.
So tell us, your parents were a very strong influence or inspiration to you?
Yes, they never assumed, there was never a question of whether any of us were going to go to university, or it wasn't a question of whether we were going to do things. It was what you were going to do. And
right.
Both.
How many siblings do you have?
I have a sister and a brother, and we're all very close in age. We're all almost the same age.
Wow.
And they are successful professionals as well. I would be humbled to explain to you what they do. So.
Well, we all love your mom.
Thank you.
Michelle, I'm happy to tell you we were 77 strong tonight.
Wow, wow.
Very impressive. If you want to join the
Fantastic.
email
Thank you.
list of Sisterhood, it's sisterhood2020@hotmail.com. Why 2020? Because it was the best year of our lives, right?
That's right.
We accept men also,
Of course.
young and old.
Yes. Wow.
Why 2020? Because we had an amazing president.
Thank you, Vicky. Vicky actually is our executive vice president.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, remember that.
What should I say?
Hi, Vicky. Where
Hi,
are you
Andre.
hiding? Where are you hiding?
I'm having a
Hi.
birthday.
Hi.
Where's her mother? Oh,
Michelle, are any of your daughters interested in following in your footsteps? I think so, but they don't know that yet. Of course, they're still very young. There are some very engineering types in them, but you know, you never know. You never know. But I think that they'll be. I hope they do whatever they do. But I hope that they'll learn to love it like I do.
For sure, for sure. It's in your family's genes. You have so many engineers.
See my Uncle Milo? He's right there. He's one of my engineer inspirations too.
Oh, there he is. Yes, I know. Yes.
So
To be an engineer, you have to be very good at mathematics, and very good, huh?
It's you know what? It's if you like it, you're good at it. If you just have to like it, which is much more important than it's a predecessor to being good at it. And anybody can be good at it.
You have to be a genius.
Sure.
Thank you, Michelle, for a lovely presentation. We really enjoyed it. And I want to say something. I have a niece who lives in London and she's an engineer. Also, I asked her, how come she chose this field? She said, oh, it's easy because there are so few girls and all the boys will be after us. So don't worry, Brian, you are the lucky one who got her.
Thank you.
And another thing regarding the minority, the visible minority, actually, according to the Canada definition, all the people from the Middle East are considered visible minority. I didn't know that. But imagine, there are perks to visible minority.
Perks, yeah.
We are the one who are born in the Middle East. We are considered by definition as visible minority.
When did they decide that?
I don't know, just read it. I read it.
Yeah, from Arab lands and
the last thing, Michelle, I remember an article that was written in the Gazette many, many years ago. And it was about an astronaut, your arms were stretching out like that. And it was a beautiful article about the future of the space industry. And you had a picture, I don't know if it was on the cover page or on the inside page, but a full picture. And we are so proud of you. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Grace, for inviting her. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so much fun.
It was one of the best, it absorbed us fully. All of them are terrific.
Thank you. I didn't get to see all your
You made it sound like fun.
Yeah, I was hoping to convince you. It's really fun.
But you know, there is something else. You know, women now are a lot into engineering, physics. Actually, last year, there was a woman who is from Ontario, from the University of Waterloo, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics. Right. And imagine, you know, like women.
It's incredible.
Yeah, remember? Yeah, last year.
I do. It's diversity is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing when you have different people of different backgrounds, of different education, and women and men sometimes have very different points of view on things. And the more diverse opinions you have in a team, the stronger the team is. And definitely I've learned that. So it's been fun. It's still very fun. I wanted to mention though that about encouraging girls and boys to go and study engineering, that one thing that's interesting also is the pressure on men in our society is not negligible either. And men are pressured to be breadwinners of their home. And that's something that's not gone yet. It's still something that is a big pressure. And engineering is a good career to be a breadwinner of a family. So over the course of my career, I'd have met men who studied and became engineers because they thought it was a way to provide for their families. That's a pressure they're under. They didn't necessarily want to study engineering. So you do have some men who actually hate it, but they're working as engineers, but they don't want to. So those are the men who tend to seem like they are sexist and come up to you and say, why are you an engineer? Women shouldn't be an engineer. I did experience that once or twice in my career, but it was coming from a place of saying, if I were you, if I were a woman and I didn't have to be an engineer, I wouldn't be. And so that's why I'm asking you, why are you here? So it's another thing that I learned, to not take that necessarily negatively, especially girls, at least in my age and older. When they studied engineering, it was purely because they loved it, not because they were pressured to support a family. So you tend to get girls who study engineering who simply love it. And you have many men who simply love it also. But that's an interesting thing. I'm curious to know that in the next 20, 30 years, when now increasingly women do have to be part of the breadwinning team of their families, will there be any women who resent being in engineering? So it's an exciting time.
Make some circle. Amazing storyteller.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye,
Good night, everyone. Good night. Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you,
Good night.
Francine.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Ruben. Bye, Norma.
Bye, Francoise.
Michelle, thank you so much. It was
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you, Françoise.
Thank
Merci.
you.
Very
Thank you
inspiring.
so much.